Let's do it.
Yep, here we go. So it's been a morning of lack of technical ability. So it's been
Out of your hands, though.
yeah,
Out of your
yeah,
hands.
yeah,
Bill tried to bring an offering and it got away from him.
yeah, yeah. I asked him if they had another one.
Pigeon flew away.
Yep. So I think the last time we were doing we were doing an offerings overview, and we talked about kind of the trying to understand the general ideas behind the offerings. Uh, you know, uh, where it takes place. We talked about we really spent a lot of time in Malachi talking about the warning of that God had for the priesthood, that they were not fulfilling their job. They were doing substandard work, and they found the work that they had been chosen to do, trained to do. They found contemptible, which means they look down on it. They kind of the way I feel about my job. You know, my employment. Not really. No, it's just maybe it is. Anyways, so we you went over the five basic offerings. There's the burnt, the meat or grain or bread. What other names they give that thing?
Meal,
Meal.
meat and meal. Yeah,
And
that's kind of a weird word.
and where that comes from in the King James um, is in Genesis when God's talking to Adam. He says the seeds will be your meat, and so the big grain being seeds, they for some reason called it meat offering, but there's no meat involved, just the bread. So there's the bread, the peace offering, sin offering, trespass offering. Um, a couple of things I guess we need to talk about is that number one thing is when you go to Leviticus chapter 1, it talks about all these offerings being voluntary. And I've had some pretty good discussions, I don't know if you guys have or not, that people have pushed back on that idea alone, that it was voluntary. They say, no, no, not all of them are voluntary. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you know, they say the sin and trespass aren't voluntary. I'm
Yep.
like, well, they kind of are.
Well, I even had pushback on the any of them being one person, which is interesting because his background is, I mean, he's Jewish. So at first he was kind of like, well, no, it's necessary, but not, you don't have to. Like you get to choose. And he said, well, if you don't do it, then you don't get to approach God. I said, yeah, but you get a choice in it. So, and
Right,
he kind of finally realized, oh, okay, yeah, go after you to get it. You have to voluntarily bring it.
right.
Um, so,
And the
It's,
point,
it's a predestination discussion. It can be a Calvinistic predestination discussion.
yeah,
That's why that is a must. I've been there, done that with an individual.
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. Because that's where it will lead to in the discussion is well so if you're saying you're telling me that we don't choose to bring a sin offering or trespass offering, or we do, does God force it, does, and then that's why it's been my conversations with it have led to that debate, Armenianism, Calvinism, the fathers, and
all the isms.
yeah,
Yeah, I find when you get in those arguments or whatever group you're with, it's side of a coin and not looking at the tail side.
that's right, yeah, good
So
way to say it.
there's two sides of this thing. So yes,
Yeah.
it's talking in circles.
So
Well,
are you saying all five, Bill, or are you saying that you think all five are voluntary?
absolutely, they have
Okay.
to be.
Yeah, yeah.
They
That's
have to
what.
be.
Yeah.
Well, and here's why I say, and this is it's good that we're getting into discussion because um, this is something that needs to be captured is, why do you think that they're voluntary, all voluntary? Is because every person that breathes, or that has been born, that comes to that age where they realize they have to make a decision. If you decide, hey, I don't want to be in the presence of God for all eternity, that's my decision. God honors that, and not happily. I mean, I don't think God's going, well, gee, finally, I didn't want to spend eternity with him anyway. You know, it, it's not a relief. It's okay. If that's your decision. I heard a comedian, which comedians really attack God all the time, uh, where this girl was like doing like a pouty voice and was like, God says, love me best or I'll hurt you or something like that. And I'm like, God, you have a terrible viewpoint of
Yeah,
this.
true.
Uh, which is like, oh my gosh, you think it's God's so vain that he's, you know, he's going to force you to, or punish you out of, glee? No, no. It's
Yeah, I remember hearing one time, and this stuck with me. I think I heard said it in one of his teachings, but he said, we talk about God's, sending people to hell, and he says that's not reality. He said God has done that from happening. Literally, you have to step over his dead body to go,
yeah, yeah,
and it's like the reality of what Jesus did. I mean, he was doing everything possible to not let that
right.
happen, but he still
Well,
gives you
even
choice.
tabernacle that we're talking about. Think about the work God did prior to Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
For them to have almost an inexcusable option.
Mm.
I think Romans 1 talks about it. Paul talks about there's no excuse,
Yep.
and there's this, like, God has gone out of his way at every moment in history to Revelation. God is continually going out of his way to encourage people to receive him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's going out of his way. He's not setting this thing up to make it unattainable. Going out of his way to show the pictures, to connect with mankind and humanity. That's why the tabernacle was a phenomenal Old Testament tool to point us to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
To right there, he's been here, but he's right there.
Yep.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm trying to find the verse like we talk about the tabernacle, and you guys may have done this in a different podcast, but I'm just thinking like when God says tabernacle, it's not like going, "Hey, I need something to satisfy me." It's the idea, "Hey, I want to be with my people.
Yeah.
Like I want to have a community. I want to commune with you guys, and the way you are right now, it's just not going to happen. So we've got to set up something. I'm able to be among you." Um, I know it's an Exodus, but I can't remember where it's at.
when he's talking about the tabernacle, that he might
Yeah,
dwell with him.
yeah,
It's probably in 28 or 29, Exodus 28,
yeah.
something like, because that's deep into the tabernacle.
Yeah,
Um,
it's 24, 25, somewhere around there.
oh,
Basically,
okay.
the idea was God says, "Hey, I want you to build me a tabernacle." So like the idea, they don't want to be distant up on a mountain. He wants to be among them,
Yep.
which to me is like the point
Mm-hmm.
of the
Um,
whole thing.
but so they're voluntary. The second thing is that we want to look at the altar as a table. Malachi's clear about that. That it's a table. So who's sitting at the table and who's sitting at the table determines a lot. So you got the four. You maybe count five participants. You got the father. You've got the priest. You've got the offerer. You've got the people that the offerer brings. But the sacrifice could also be considered a participant because it represents Jesus, it represents us. So, however you want to count it. If you say four, I'd say okay. If you say five, I'd say okay. I'm not going to die on that hill. Um, but what's interesting, we talked about last time, there are two categories. There's the sweet savor, which means God finds pleasure, and then you have the non-sweet savor, but they're not called that. It's just they're not called non-sweet savor. They're just not called sweet savor. This is we call them that because that's absent.
Yeah.
It's not because it
Yeah.
technically. I remember the first time I realized that is like I was looking for that non-sweet savor, but it really doesn't say that. It just omits it.
It just doesn't say. Yeah, it doesn't say
Right.
the other. Yeah.
But what's fun?
I like the way I think his New American Standard does it, and we kind of miss it. Instead of well pleasing, I mean, instead of sweet smelling, it says well pleasing or acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And
Acceptable.
yeah. So one of the things that came across me when I was doing this study years ago, or last year I think it was when we get to Romans, he says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, whole, acceptable.
Yeah.
And that word acceptable is the same idea as well pleasing, which means 12, Romans 12, 1 and 2 is those first three.
Yeah. Right.
Like he's not asking you to bring yourself as a sin or trespass offering. He's asking in that first part, which is essentially what this whole thing is about, is relating to God and to people through
Mm-hmm.
those three offerings,
Right.
which to me is amazing.
And what's interesting about the wording of sweet savor is it actually shows up in one of the what we consider non sweet savor offerings. That it shows, so it's really, and where it shows up is very interesting, which we'll get into. I don't want to get into it right now, but where it shows up is intriguing, because there's a lot of implications. Um, so there's those two categories. We talked about that a little bit, and then we kind of did a quick overview of what each one was, which is the burnt. Who's sitting at the table? The father. He's the only one sitting at the table. Is the father, so he's the consumer. Then you got the grain, the bread, or the meat offering. There's two people sitting at the table. There's the father. Then there's the priest. And again, these first two, the offer has nothing. It's nothing out of this. So then you have the third one, which is the peace offering, which everybody's sitting at the table at that one. You got everybody present. Then you got the sin offering, which is the father again, priest somewhat, not really like a meal, but he's almost like he passes by the table. He doesn't really sit at the table; he almost passes by it. And then the trespass offering, you got again the father, and I think he's the only one sitting at that one. So what?
Well, it's interesting to me is the trespass to eat because he gets whoever does the ministry of it gets a portion.
Mm,
But the sin offering, man, most of that stuff is burnt outside the camp,
yeah,
which is not God's table. Which, like, he's like, I don't want to eat any
yeah,
of this.
exactly.
Like, I don't.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, there's parts of it that go on the altar that he consumes,
Very little. Yeah.
and what is on the altar is very telling about what they are. You know, and again, I don't want to get too specific, but because we'll get there eventually. Um, but it's if you don't know who's sitting at the table, you can't really get the theme. You can't really understand. And a lot of times when we say offering, we clump it into a burnt offering. When sometimes it may not be, but anyway. Um,
Well, that's one good thing about the Hebrew. If you can look at the word, it's burnt because they use a totally different word
mhm,
when it's that, which means ascending, like the idea of the smoke coming up.
right,
Where the other one they always use korban, which is just a general word for offering.
right,
So yeah, one of the cool things about when you're looking through, even before the tabernacle was built. Noah does an offering. Cain and Abel do
yeah,
offerings. Noah's the first one where you see the word burnt offering actually used when he comes off the boat, and he does a burnt offering, which is telling.
hmm
That same word is used every time it's the burnt offering. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Isaac and
mhm.
Abraham and Isaac as well in 22, Genesis
yep,
22.
yep, yep.
So here's some of the truths that I've just this is not exhaustive. It's just a few things that I think we've kind of said it, but just kind of be more specific about it. Is the priest becomes vital to the people and to Jehovah, equally important to both sides. one, and God hamstrings himself, humbles himself, and sets up a set of rules that for both to operate on. You're going to do this, and I'm going to do this. You're going to do this, and I'm going to do this. But if the priest is not involved, if there's no connection, there's no union. So we have to see our our job as a vital part of this. Um, we can sidestep it. We can say it's not important. We can say, yeah, somebody else will do that. Uh, but ultimately, it's our job, and we need to know how to do it. Um,
And
uh,
then that goes back to Malachi, goes back to Hosea, goes
mhm,
back to so many of those minor prophets of where it means all he always knew where to attack,
mm,
right? Especially with the king and the king's heart. And if the enemy, and then when I say enemy, I'm not necessarily talking about Satan,
yeah,
but Israel and to Judah, when those two split, it would always be when these other countries would come in and they would ransack the temple. And
hmm,
now that's the temple versus the tabernacle, but like the enemy knows God's system.
yeah,
Like they understood it in the Old Testament. I think the enemy today, spiritually speaking, understands the system better than most the
yep,
system, and it is set up on us. Like Jesus even tells Peter, "You're the rock on where I'm going to build this thing," and of course that text terribly, but what a confession Peter makes that ultimately turns into a foundation that we all are called to build our life on.
hmm,
The confession that He's the Christ, He's the Messiah, He's the and then we become the foundation for making or allowing this thing to move like the priest did in the Old Testament,
mm, yeah. Um,
Well,
right?
I think last time we're when
Yeah.
with the Cain and Abel idea, God asked for an offering, and it's not because God needs something from us, but when we worship, bring an offering, when we worship God, it protects us from and putting things in proper perspective. And the enemy knows that. So one of the ways that they would attack Israel was to do that, to stop the worship of God. And so when you stop worshiping the Lord, everything goes. And so we talk about kings. A good king, the first thing a good king would do is he would set the priesthood back in order and start worship again.
yeah,
And that's really what set them apart, a good king from a bad king.
yeah,
So the enemy knows, you're going to worship something. If something besides God, it's just a matter of time I got you. You
yeah,
know, there's so people are like, man, church is always asking for money. No, that's just a way of you being a partner with God in the world to bring His kingdom, but it also protects you and self-focused and turning in yourself.
right.
I mean, God knows us very well, and He's not up there like, oh, I need someone to worship me. Like He don't need that. Like
No,
He set it in order as a protect. So
no, that's a good. Um, so, another one other truth, excuse me, is that the order of the offerings is a very big truth. If you study in the how they're set up in the order they go. Now, the order that they're given in Leviticus is not how they're actually done. They're done in a different order, which when that happens, you go, wait a minute, there's something. If God gave them this way, but then He says do them this way, then
yeah,
there's something there, and and this is just partly my opinion, partly I know this is truth, but the looking at the order of the offerings tells me how God thinks, how God views things, how because He's given this from His standpoint. Now, in the offerings, it switches from one point of view to another, and we'll get into that later. But for at the beginning, He says, okay, here is my what I'm thinking. So you have the first one being all consumed by God, then you have the second being consumed by God, and then by priest, then the third being consumed by everybody involved, and then you have the sin and trespass. So you have the burnt, the meat or grain, the peace, the sin, trespass, and you think, okay, well, why did he put the sin and the trespass at the end? Well, that tells you
Yeah.
God's focus. What's God's focus? Is it sin? No. I remember saying this to somebody one time and saying, you know, the focus of this whole thing is not sin. And a guy that had been in ministry many, many, many years had served as a leader in ministry. He stopped me and said, "What are you?
Right.
What? How? That's what I've been taught all my life. It's what it's about." And it just flabbergasted him that this was not about sin. That this point of
Yeah.
this life was not about sin. And how many people need to hear that? That is,
But we do a
Are we
really
doing
really poor job of that
percentages?
every Sunday.
hmm?
Can I
But
do a percentage? Because I'm one of those showmen. Can
Okay,
I do a percentage?
sure.
Um, I would still say, even after Sunday ramblings for years and years at the same church, I would still say Derek Jones's opinion of percentage, 90%, maybe 95% of the people
Mm,
that not focus on sin for all these years, focus on something completely different. I'd still say 90 to 95% constantly think about
yeah.
sin. It is they are wrapped up in it so much. There is zero at times zero way out of it.
Mm,
God's already prescribed the way out of it. We just don't want to see it.
mm,
We don't because we love to sit in our sin because it immobilizes. Seems to be it's actually more comfortable
mm,
to sit in the sin and trespass offering than to sit in than to go in and bring a burnt grain or peace because
mm,
you ain't got nothing to do with the burnt because your butt completely in flames
mm-hmm,
and the other two have everything to do with somebody else.
mm,
But the sin and trespass is all self-consuming.
mm.
Cain's mentality,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Cain's grandson in chapter 5 of Genesis. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
That's my little. I see. I get hot on that one, man. That one drives me
Well,
nuts. But anyway,
I was gonna say, could you bring a little bit more passion to it? I kind of was falling off there just a minute, you know.
the zealot come out. I
Yeah.
apologize for
No,
stabbing people.
no, no. But
Yeah, but
it is it's partly the enemy, but it's mostly us because we are, especially Americans, we are can-do people, and even though it's kind of waned off over generations, but we generally are task oriented. So it's like, hey, give us a task and we'll make it happen. And so we want to be a part of it. We want to do something. We want to have a hand in it. And we think that, and how many of you? I mean, how many I don't know about you guys, but I've heard the theology of he gets you clean at first, but then you got to keep yourself clean. They don't come out and say it like that, but that's the way they act.
well, I mean, I remember when I first started going to church, like it was like you hear the gospel presentation was God is dealing with your and next week come back and learn how you dealt with your sin, and then next week come back and learn how you're dealing with sin. And so it's like it's very much sin conscious gospel, and I don't think that's the gospel at all.
Mm,
It's like God saying, I got a problem because I can't deal with the problem of sin, but I want to deal with it so we can get back to the relationship,
right.
we get back to the walking together and partnering together and living together, and we never stopped doing the first thing. My pastor said this I thought was phenomenal. He said, I'm thankful for the cross, but I don't live there.
Mm, mm.
Hmm. That's a big time
The
statement.
title of his message was resurrection and beyond. Like God did all this so you
Right.
can live.
Yes.
And it was like we don't think that way. We spend a lot of time just focusing on our sin, trying to get cleaned up, and trying not to make mistakes. And it paralyzes the believer. I think the enemy's behind it 100%.
But but uh, the message of the gospel is, I want you to live my life. I want you to be like I am. But there's a problem. You have this thing that's killing you and keeping you away from what your purpose is. So let's take care of that so you can live. So
Yeah.
and I've said this how many times I don't know. I don't want to count, but or could count. But it's if you focus as a believer, as a as in the first three, the burnt, the meat, the peace, you won't have to worry about the sin and trespass. It won't even be a factor, because by the time do you have to do the sin and trespass? Absolutely, can't do anything without that. But once that's completed, now are you going to misstep? Are you going to fall? Are you going to have things you need to confess? Absolutely. You know, you're not going to get away from wrongdoing, but that's not, like you say, that's not where we live. That's not where we focus. That's not where we dwell, because you can't. It's a it's like taking a shower. And we said this example, taking a shower, going outside, and you felt a wind blow against you, and oh, I must be dirty again. You go run back in to take a shower, or you get you touch something, or you pick up some dirt, and you go, oh, I gotta get a shower, and you go back, and you're constantly just running to get clean. It's paralyzing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you
And
ever thought about the priest? Let's just say we know they're kind of on a cycle of serving. And I've thought about this and just thought about it again. But have you ever thought about a priest as soon as it opens and you see the face of that person you've seen before? And it's immediately when that door opens, it's an assumption this dude's bringing another daggum sin offering before he even right like you. It's just like, again, it's the same. It's like this individual offerer can never get past their sin and trespass to bring something that literally ascends up
Yeah.
to the Father for the King. I would just it's like a so my question is I can and it's a statement too, but I can see the priest getting frustrated with an individual that every time the tabernacle gate they it's like there's another trespass offering, another sin. Or do you think that that was ever the case that they went through?
I don't know.
I
well,
feel like today,
to bring
I
a
feel like
trespass violation, like something had to happen, like you had to wrong somebody. So if you show up every day with a trespass offering, the priest is going to think, why can't this guy get along with people? Why does he keep causing problems? Is he stealing stuff, breaking stuff? He's not really being a really good member of.
Plus, it
So
gets
the
really
bigger problem would be
expensive.
like, what is your deal, man? Yeah.
but he's being obedient to bring a voluntary offering.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
It would get expensive.
Oh yeah. Well,
oh, yeah,
It'd
that's
get
true.
expensive. It's, I mean, your behavior would start to modify just by the sheer need of,
I
it
got to quit
costing
this,
you,
but I'm not
which I
going to
think
have
is a
anything
good
left.
kind of way to learn. Like,
Yeah,
that behavior is going to cost you something.
yeah,
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 sin does
sometimes.
cost you something.
it does. It does. You will
They
pay.
don't see it right away.
Yeah.
Like the consequences aren't immediate, so we lose sight of how bad it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
looking at the offerings as God gave them, it gives you His heart, plus how He wants you to live, and how He feels about things. How He looks at, like we talked about the sin trespass, where it doesn't say it was well pleasing, which means God's not waiting around the corner to whack you. He's not giddy about the fact that, ooh, they messed up. I can't wait to try out my new ball bat that I bought. You know, it's not
Right.
it's, it's not that way. Um, so that's a big time freedom thing. If people can hear it, is God's not trying to get you. God's not trying to come after you. He wants to commune with you, but it's got to be in the order that's most beneficial to you. And you know the communion, which comes third, which we you just talked about it before we got on here, Derek, about having communion. Uh, first you've got to be outside yourself, which is putting God first. Then you're the priesthood, which is the first two, the greatest commandments, right? Jesus said, "Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself." So, though that is the burnt and the meat combined. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, because it's outside of you. Both those are outside of you. Um, but it's also a picture of the abundant life. Um, Abundance, you know, man, I don't know when's the last time I heard a message on the abundant life and it come across as that don't sound abundant. you know,
Mm.
abundant means you have more than enough to share. You have more than enough to give. And there's a lot of believers that don't have that. They don't have enough to give. They barely got enough to get, they have barely enough
Get
to
by.
survive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Man, they got to come back every week to get a little bit more because they're feeling like they're running out.
yeah. They got to they just got to hang on by their fingernails.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
I've
you're
got a guy like what, Bill?
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I've got a guy like that I'm meeting with now that um, is now keep asking me. He keeps asking me, "What do I teach others? What do I give others?" And he's a pastor.
Wow.
He's a pastor, and he keeps asking me this. And so, my genius mind, of course, comes up with some genius things, but it's not me at all. It's the Lord, of course, and the information that I've been told and the wisdom that I've gained from failure. And so I'm like, dude, when people start coming after you and you realize they're hungry for something that you have, and then you start feeding and you run out, you're going back to the miracle worker, Christ Himself, but you're also going back to where the miracle is happening, the information. And I said, you're going to keep coming back to me because you can get information from me, but ultimately God's the one breaking. God's the one giving the miracle, and so this thing is starting to happen with him that is phenomenal, and I'm watching it happen, and I'm like, and he lives in another country, which is great for me and it's good for him, but this thing's starting to take shape, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this this guy is now realizing how much he needs a connection with me,
Mm.
not because he needs me to, not because I'm something amazing.
Mm.
He knows where there's information. He knows where there's truth. He knows where there's a treasure box, Matthew 13:51 and 52.
Right.
He knows a guy that is copied. He knows a guy that has been information. And so there's this idea, and I guess seeing it in light of the peace offering, in light of having something to bring, he now has something to bring to the table. Whereas when I first met him,
Mm.
he didn't have anything, and he was losing in the system. He was losing as a pastor. He's still losing. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
He is still losing pastor when we go by numbers,
Mm.
and that's good for him right now.
Yeah.
And that his source is not his number of attendance. His source of success is not his reaching and how many souls are being saved. He's starting to realize, man, this is bigger than that.
Mm.
And these offerings, man, if I wouldn't know or have the understanding that I have of the offerings, I don't able to help him with the peace offering, because it is a peace offering. I'm bringing him
Mm-hmm.
with my offering to the altar as God sitting with he and I, and then now he's starting other people into the picture, and that peace offering is. And remember, I mentioned that right before we left last week about John 17. And
Mm-hmm.
man, I've been tripping over that text all week. This is desire to see his men become or understand to bring that connection to the world, right? Just the way Jesus, he's praying for them in the peace offering idea.
Hmm.
Is that, have y'all thought
Yeah.
about that anymore? Am I just in freaking left field?
No, you're not
I
left
mean, I
field.
think he said, "Hey, Jesus saying basically, I brought them to the table, Father. Like I want them to
Mm-hmm.
be as one as we're one." So there's that definitely that peace and that communion idea of
Hmm.
clearly is there, but it's not like, "Hey, come and just sit and get fat." It's like come and
Yeah,
eat, but now go and invite
that's
other
it.
people in.
Right.
One of the old prayers, like because of what you have, now you have the responsibility to invite others into it.
Mm.
Which goes back to
Yeah,
the abundance of what Bill was talking about
yeah,
with the
and what disciple
abundance.
making is all about. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
And so what we have here, and this is one of the biggest truths out of this whole thing, is what we have is a system built and designed to force us to interact with one another. That we cannot do this alone. You cannot be on an island. You cannot just say, "Well, I'm just going to abandon all those other heathens and all those ungodly people that can't get their life together." I'm gonna run this on my own, and uh, I'm free of you yobs, and that's not how God designed this. He designed it so we have to interact with one another. We have to um, have relationship, and not just relationship with each other, but relationship with Him and each other in a Trinity type of situation where we're all communing, and it really brings out the selflessness of what this life's about, because it's
yeah,
why is the priest there? Is he there for himself? Yeah, in a way, but mainly he's there for God. He's there for the offerer, and the offerer, is he there just for himself? Maybe a little, but ultimately it's outside of himself. And why is God there? Is it just for him? No, it's for the benefit of the participants. So everybody's there for everybody else, but they are going to get some benefit out of it. So I don't want to just make it a carrot, and I don't want to say, "Hey, believer, come do this, and you'll never have a problem," because that's not true either. Uh, yeah,
yeah. That whole idea of like, oh, we can do this without people. It would be easier.
yeah,
It would be less problems.
yeah,
But that ain't how this works. I mean, I think it's First John says like we say we love God and like you can't. That's not a plausible way to live. Like if you love God, you're gonna have to love your neighbor. You're
yes,
gonna have to sacrifice for other people. Like
yeah,
that's just the reality of it. Yeah.
We were in,
So,
I was doing chapter 5 of Tally Ho with a guy yesterday, and we got to the galley slave, and it's interesting. And it's like one of the best examples I think in that book, just of the intention of what that person under the bus see, only responding to the commands of the one above that sees better than they see, and they just waiting for the cadence of row, 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 just listening. And yet the whole point in that is to get someone else to their desired destination.
mm-hmm.
mm,
And I can't help but think that the ultimate example of the all has got to be something similar to that, to where we know the destination is into the presence of God,
Mm-hmm.
is into not just right relationship with God, but right relationship with others. And it's, we have one job, one main goal, and the main goal is, yeah, we want people to be better, we want people to try, but it's like we're trying to move them to the destination that Jesus the Father has always laid out, which is his kingdom, his reality, galley slave, man.
Mm,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a.
yeah,
I had to drop that one in there, man, because I know what y'all's brains are thinking. I know you're like you're going through that list of Theophilus and just
Yeah.
running through the painstaking research,
Yeah.
the personal
yeah,
responsibility, the list um, of what we have to do,
Yeah.
work we're called to do, and these offerings are a beautiful connection
yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's gonna cost me for somebody else.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
if you're bringing a peace offering, man, that's a pretty big offering. That's a pretty expensive offering, and you're gonna
Because
share
it's
it.
got to
You're
feed
not,
multiple people.
man. I mean, it ain't no small little birds on it. It's all. We can talk about that later, but
Yeah.
it's an expensive offering. But you're wanting to do it because you want other people to experience the peace with God that you have.
Mm.
Like that's the point, and it's gonna be painstaking. You're gonna have to do the work of it's gonna cost that much. So
You know,
yeah,
I think the convenience Christianity that we have perpetuated is probably the most harmful thing. It's like oh yeah, you can serve God and you can be a part of what it means to be a believer without any pain, without any without any
yeah,
effort. Just sleepwalk through it. And
that's a lie. That's just a flat out lie. Yeah, yeah.
well, you
That ain't
could
what this life is like.
Smuggle
Yeah.
your soul into heaven.
yeah, you're just it's all about, and it really is about you. Um, but
And well, the problem is we present that that's the way in, and once you come in that way, you think that's how it is. Like when you start talking about sacrifice and self denial and all that stuff, it's like, wait, what?
yeah,
I didn't get that at the beginning. Like the invitation to this club was, God's got a wonderful plan for your life. Believe in Him, and He'll give you all the stuff you want.
what's
Uh,
what's
and then
Or
funny.
you're
the
like talking
torture
about,
of hell too. The
yeah,
torture of hell, the
right, right,
scare him into heaven. With hell.
Have you ever been talking to somebody that God is dealing with on a particular issue, and you say something that has nothing in your mind has nothing to do with what God's pointing at, but that's what they hear, and they say, "Are you telling me I got to give up X?" And you're like, "We weren't even talking about that. Why are you?"
didn't say that.
I didn't say that, but
Sounds like
apparently,
somebody else talking to you.
yeah, God's pointing something out. So
Mm.
if if you feel like God's or people are constantly saying the same thing, maybe that's not people. Maybe it's God. Um,
Yeah, the spirit might be saying something.
right, right. So when we look at the offerings and we look at the very first one, that's in the text. Before we even get into it, I want to set the scene for when they got these things, when they got the prescription for this. So the history of this is that uh, God had given them the specifications for the tabernacle. They had made it, built it, and then um, it's all set up, ready to go. But they have no prescription on action. So Moses is in the Holy of Holies, and God begins to speak across the mercy seat, and He gives them this. Uh, he basically gives the offerings to function in the tabernacle, which I think that's a big deal to me.
Say that one more time.
So the history, the timing of God giving these offerings was after the tabernacle had been given in specification. They had they had assembled it and they had built it, and now it's sitting there, but nobody knows what to do yet. So Moses is in the Holy of Holies, and it's a great picture of Jesus, before the foundation of the world, before any activity, for any action whatsoever. God says this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to be. And this is the prescription. And then once that's given, then boom, they bounce into action, and Moses and Aaron and his sons begin to do the work of Moses basically kicks off the sacrificial system, and then
It kind
after
of
that,
models it,
huh?
kind of models it for Aaron and
Right.
yeah.
He says this is
Yeah, so
it.
what you're talking about maybe as a help to our listeners if they don't know, like Leviticus 1:1 kind of
Yeah.
sets this up. Basically, they built a tabernacle. Leviticus 1:1 opens with, and the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto the congregation. Basically, across the mercy seat is
Yeah.
how it's kind of worded.
Yeah.
God starts talking to Moses like, "Hey, here's what I want you guys to do."
Right.
So that's the kind of the text you're pulling out of.
Right. Right. Thanks that sometimes I just start talking and I don't tell people where I am.
Kind of see where you're at, and they can go see it,
Yes.
in the text. So
Right. So that it's very important to know that, because that's exactly the action that Jesus took when he came. He was the new Moses,
yeah,
and he would say, he would do things that would point to being the new Moses. And he uses references like the the brass serpent, that he would be lifted up. A lot of those pictures. So Jesus, being the new Moses, did the same thing. The tabernacle set up, the body is set up. Now the action begins after, when he institutes it. So now
yes.
we,
So maybe before you we talked about a minute ago that God wants to be with his people. Like up until that point, God was up on the mountain with Moses speaking.
yeah,
Now he's moved down into the camp, into this tent, and now he's speaking from there, not from the high lofty place, which is a great picture of what he came into in a body
yeah,
and began to speak. And now the same thing's true with us. Holy Spirit moves in, and now is speaking through us.
mm,
Like it's such a like God's drawing near and drawing near and drawing near, even like it's to the point where He wants to live you, but be in you,
mm,
which I think is a phenomenal
yeah.
picture of what this whole thing's about.
And so once this begins, and this is something that, and we'll probably say this, and then we'll stop with the structure, um, in the offerings. So, and this is how you unlock. This is how the offerings become, um,
Usable.
well, usable but understandable, if I can use that. It's not a it's not a intellectual understanding. It's just there's a system.
Yeah,
There's a
framework of how
pattern.
things are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a pattern. Once I see it, then I can unlock every one of them. So
right.
basically, each offering is divided into sections. So you had what we talked about, the sweet savor, non-sweet savor. The non-sweet savor are basically broken into three sections. The meat offering is kind of, it's debatable whether there's three. I think there's three, but I make it three because it fit. You know,
There's
maybe,
variations on some of
yeah,
them,
there's
but yeah,
variation, but
category,
but
sure.
basically there's three categories in each. So the burnt offering is going to be in three different sections. So why three sections? So like why three sections in the burnt meat piece? Why, and then in the sin and trespass there's four sections. Well, why is there four sections? Well, because it's giving you a division. The very first three are giving you a division in, um, well, the first one. Let's just deal with the burnt offering. Is where are you standing spiritually? Where's your maturity? Um, and it's basically a realization of what you own. Um, so a believer that doesn't is brand new, that doesn't know much, they don't know what's going on, then they're going to be considered in, I don't want to say lower, in the first category, or the last category, actually, chronologically they'd be in the last category. That does, but each category, God does not look at it as one better or worse. He views them equal. So whether you realize your wealth in as a believer or not, God does not hold that against you. Um,
Well, let me me say some words that are like in the text, so maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. You're talking about in the burnt. There's three levels.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the first level would be a bullock,
Mm-hmm.
an ox, something, a very large sacrifice, and then the second level would be a sheep or a goat, which would be still pretty expensive, and then the final one would be like two pigeons or two turtle doves.
Right.
And so you see this rank of what you're able to bring. So if you're kind of poor physically, you wouldn't be able to bring a bull.
Right.
You'd probably more than likely bring two pigeons. Get that spiritually speaking. If you're a new believer, it's really you're not bringing bulls.
Yeah.
Like you don't have you just don't have that spiritual wealth yet.
Right.
So an offering for you would be two pigeons. That would be a big sacrifice. But if somebody who's been in while walking with the Lord and pretty mature, they try to bring two pigeons. It's like, no, man, that's not a sacrifice for you. That doesn't that's not enough cost. That's not really, It's like me saying, uh, I've been in Christ for like, oh, I'm going to volunteer to pray at the meal. Like that is not, a very difficult spiritual action to
Right.
perform. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But if somebody's a new believer, to pray out loud over a meal and a little bit of a uncomfortable thing. So to them, it is a sacrifice. To them, it is a stepping out. It is a costly thing to them.
Right.
So that's kind of how the different categories you're talking about. Not necessarily like you're more important if you bring a bigger one. It's just what you're able to bring, and it
Right.
should cost you. It should be a cost. It should be a sacrifice.
Right. And go ahead.
So, would the priest know what is expected by the offer, or would the priest make answer that or not?
Yeah.
No. Answer that. Answer
Answer.
that. No, that's not what
Yes,
I
sir.
mean.
Yes, sir. Three
Um,
bags full. So, so yeah. So that brings it, and that's one of the big implications of this is how would the priest know whether or not he's bringing something that identifies, and that's really what we're talking about. What sacrifice identifies the offerer? Is the offerer wealthy? Is the offerer somewhat wealthy, or is the offerer poorer than dirt? You know, what is he? And you know, and a lot of people use this, to identify Jesus's social, financial status because what his mom brought to the, she brought birds, which would be a low, poor sacrifice. Well, from God's perspective, He looks at it and goes, "Hey,
Yeah.
they brought a bull. They brought what fit them. So how does the priest know what fit them? Well, that means that the priest has to have some knowledge about the person. That implies a relationship. So that means that the priest has to be in the community. The priest has to be interacting with people. They have to recognize who's who. So it makes they got to make it their business to know everybody else's business. Not in a bad way.
And it ain't like you're looking. Yeah, it's not like you're asking for a W-2. You just kind of know. Like you spend
Yeah.
time in a group of people, you kind of know where people are, either financially or within the standing of the community.
Right.
I think a priest would eventually, maybe, when they first start coming, they don't know, they're learning, but eventually the priest is going to make an assessment.
Right.
I don't know if he ever like went, nah, that's not enough, and sent him away. I think the honorable thing for a person to do in that day would bring what they were would stretch them a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The fact that they're wanting to bring a burnt offering tells me they're going to bring as much as they possibly can. So if they're able to bring more than two turtle doves, they would.
Right.
But they're, because a burnt offering is really just I want to just worship God. I want to just pour my heart out as a worship act to the Lord. And I don't think you're going to try to sidestep that.
Well,
You know
you
what I
would
mean?
hope.
Like if you're doing it, you want to worship God. You're not going to try to, you know what I mean? I guess it's possible that some people would kind of manipulate that, but I think that kind of loses sight of the whole reason of the burnt offering itself. You know what I mean? So
Well, somebody may say, "Hey, I want to be seen as worshiping God, but I don't want to give. I don't. I may have a lot of bull or a lot of cattle, but I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't give it up, right? Um,
yeah,
and maybe they get away with it. Maybe they have a lot of cattle and they bring a lamb. Okay. And they say, yeah, this is my sacrifice, and the priest says, well, hi, John, yes, this is acceptable, it's not no blemish, and everything, and he offers the sacrifice, and then later that week he's out walking around and he runs into John. He goes, John, what you doing? He goes, oh, I'm just going to market. Well, what are you taking to market? Well, I got these
27
these
cattle.
cows,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, how many cows you have there? And he's like, I got about 10. And he goes, well, wait a minute, is that all your
You're
cattle? And he
pretty
goes,
wealthy.
no, no, this is like a fraction of what I've got. Wait a minute, don't I remember you bringing a lamb? You know, so next time John comes and brings his lamb, the priest goes, no, no,
Kind of like,
no, that don't match
kind
you,
of
man.
slide one by.
That don't match you. I'm sure he's. I'm sure.
Chill.
I'm sure that the priest said, "Man, you need to get back." I think that's a quote. That. Well, they
I've
have to
been bringing
be.
that weak sauce in here.
Yeah, yeah. Where's that? Where's the where? Because this is supposed to be you. So that's another big truth out of this is that these animals in these sacrifices were not just animals that were uh, that were given to so the person didn't have to die, which is what it was, but it was also the animals dying in my place, so actually I am dying. That's the identification idea behind it is I'm dying, I should die. I to really worship God, I should be consumed. But that's not God's heart. God doesn't want me to be a flash in the pan necessarily. He wants me to continue on. So uh, I bring the sacrifice that identifies with me, and your wealth
Yeah,
is what we're
living
interested in.
sacrifice. Yeah.
Yeah, what we're interested in is your wealth. So what do you have? What do you own? So a believer, and this is true of every believer. Every believer is at the point of believing or becoming a believer. They are endowed with all things. They have all wealth. Now, do they realize it? No, I didn't. I doubt if anybody did.
Yeah.
It's very rare. I mean, they'd be a prodigy if they did, realizing what they owned when they become a believer.
Mm.
So as you
Or
progress,
don't know how to. Yeah.
do what?
Yeah. Or they don't know how to access it. Like
Yes,
they're like a child and they've got a trust fund, but they don't know how to
right,
get
right,
to it. You know.
right. They're 5 years old and they don't know how to get into their bank account. Uh, and that's not. And nobody ridicules the 5-year-old for that. It's just what it is. Now, if you're 35 years old and don't know how to get in your bank account, there's a problem. You know, you definitely don't know what you own, and you're a moron for not knowing, right? Uh, which is
You imagine a 35-year-old who's got a $25 million trust fund and shows up at your house in tattered clothes and goes, "Hey, can I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?"
yeah, yeah,
You're looking at him like, "What? Why are you even here?"
exactly. It's like your cat.
Yeah, right now. Feed
Isn't it?
me.
Isn't it interesting at the end of the seven parables, which is the eighth parable is the
Mate,
scribe,
I understand.
but
You
at
got your
the end
face
of
on.
the parables, Jesus says to the disciples, "Do you understand what
Yeah,
I'm saying?" Right?
right.
Like, oh yeah, yeah, we got this one.
Yeah, sure.
And then Jesus got it if you sunamia, the word, if you can line these things up that we just talked about the kingdom,
Yeah,
then this is how you should be. So it's like the keys to the kingdom parables for unlocking the treasure,
yeah,
right? Like what
Yep.
Jesus is saying to the disciples in that text is what we're talking about here is not that we have something others don't have, just that we realize how we access our treasure. And
yeah.
the way we access our treasure is others are more important.
Hmm. Yeah,
Others matter.
yeah,
Like the outsiders coming in, concept of the kingdom is sowing the seed onto the hearts. And what is our heart? And then I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's just again, I'm connecting something I've been seeing for the with this with this teaching of the offerings and the wealth and the identification is Jesus is like, if you are a man that understands these parables of the kingdom, you will be like person, a scribe that is able, has been discipled in the kingdom and is able to pull out of his treasure new and old.
Right.
And I have to think that that would just be that connection to the offerings.
That's part of it, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
if to understand these things, talk about opening up your wealth, man. This is this is a wealth. You know, uh, yeah. I think about like you've said already. How these things become beneficial to you, how you use them, how they help guide you. You know, there's
Yeah,
a
they're
lot
not
of
religious practices or
no.
reality, spiritual realities. Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
roadmap. It's a roadmap. So just to understand, hey, there's wealth to be understood. There's wealth be discovered. I just have to discover it. I have to uncover it. So that as I progress, as I'm constantly doing these, my wealth status goes up. And that's in that business. I mean, in general,
Well,
is
that's life. And
yeah,
like, most kids, when they're starting out, they're 18, 20 years old, ain't got two nickels rubbed together.
yeah,
But over time, you kind of build some savings, you start paying stuff off, and it starts to. I just remember watching my parents, when I was young, and they were kind of we were struggling when we were early 8, 10 years old, and as we got a little bit older in our teenage years, they started to kind of manage their money a little bit better, and you could see the benefit of that
yeah,
around our house. And I watch myself kind of walk through that same path, and now watching my son kind of start down that road. He's like, I'm making money, but like I want a house, I want this. So, like,
yeah,
it's coming, son.
yeah.
Just you're all right.
Right.
And it's just fun to watch them mature and grow as they, I'm amazed. Like when we become a believer, like we have it. Like we don't have to beg God to get it.
Yeah.
God's He's already. Now we've just got to learn to manage it and to apply it and to take it. And that's so true in life. Like, like your ability to earn at 20 is just not as the same as it is at 35 or 40. You have
Yeah.
a skill set, whatever means that you do for income. You just get better. You just get more skills. You get more value. You bring more value to an employer or to an employee situation, so you can demand more. You know what I mean? You can get more. And I think things true with this is like we can bring more to the table as we grow
Yep.
in the Lord, and it's not that we didn't have it before. Now we just know how to appropriate it and bring it out. I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah.
If
So
anybody's still listening, I wasn't just sitting around talking.
Right? Exactly.
I mean, and I've taught this. I've given this away to individuals on, in a corporate setting, a large crowd setting. But like I'm still finding like I don't know why Bill didn't teach me this one, but I've never heard the connection to Moses and God and the tabernacle like God and Jesus before the foundation of the world. I've never heard that, Bill, but I'm not going to blame you because I got it now, and and that's good. I've
I'm
never
joking because
seen
I
that.
know he said it because I've heard him say it. So
So, what is that a lesson? Is that a lesson? It could very well be. Just when you
yeah.
think you've got it all figured out, God's going to say, "You got
Well,
something else to show you."
just taking this idea practically from a disciple making standpoint. Like, so Bill taught me the tabernacle and offerings. Man, it was like 2005,
oh yeah,
2005,
4 or 5.
and we went through it, and then we went through it as a group again years later. And then I don't know, about 2 years ago, I taught this with different guys. Just basic introduction. Well, for whatever reason, last year I felt really compelled. The group of guys I meet with on Saturday mornings now, I felt compelled to walk through these texts just slowly with these guys. And I had the kind of the framework that Bill had taught me, the little key pieces for sure. But then I started kind of like going down a little bit deeper into like the words and the Hebrew, like, and I just started putting together the notes of the things he taught me, the things we'd learned together, and the things that I was learning then. This document just got big. It's just like at some points you just kind of go, okay, this is gonna choke anybody that I try to give it to. And we spent um, doing just the tabernacle structure was about 5 months. Meeting every week, and then the the offerings and the priesthood idea was another 4 to 5 months. So it was 8, 9, 10 months of going walking through this stuff. Now when we're talking about it, it's like it's not that I've heard something new, but I heard a different nuance to something.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a
Or it made
clearer
a different
picture.
connection.
Yeah, it's like wow, I never put those two pieces together, but
Yeah.
now that I have, it's like wow, that's a big. So it's like it's just compounding. Like money's just in the bank and it's just bringing interest now. It's growing really without us really doing much. You know what I mean? Because
But
we've
what
learned to
Jason
handle
is saying is Bill needs to finish the book.
it. Yeah.
Bill needs to finish, right?
Yeah.
Finish the 70,
Well,
I think 75 pages,
I
and
I
he
have
can
if
take
I've learned
Jason's
anything if I've
mind.
learned anything about Bill Carrier is all the information that he needs in his mind and his heart. But to get him to categorically and systematically put it down into something that he can hand off
Yeah.
is like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
You want to talk about him for days without even really looking at his Bible. It's so in him.
oh my
But when
god.
you ask him to get a polished thing out, I mean, I still ask him now. Tell him to get his tally ho notes out, and I guarantee you, on the like old printouts of like work on one side and his notes on the other. I bet you got it right there beside you, don't you?
Moving right along.
So it'd be like you know, one side of the paper is his notes, and then on the back side of that same paper is like a copy of some kind of work related to like a year ago. He's just going to recycle and not throw it away. Let's reuse this page. So his notebook looks like a manual on one side, and then Bible training on the other.
That's funny.
It's quite
Um,
funny.
um,
Buy some fresh paper, Bill.
yeah, I probably do.
It ain't that expensive.
I probably do. I probably could afford it, maybe. Um,
Yeah, I think
yeah, there was something I was going to say, and I can't remember what I was going to say. You got me off.
well,
Just got thrown under the bus.
just the volume of riches that you have,
Yeah.
and you start to develop.
Mm,
Wow, I've got a. It's not that I've got a bunch of spiritual money in the bank. I'm starting to take that money, not just sit there in the bank, but I'm starting to invest it in people, and as I invest it in people, it compounds it.
yeah.
So the treasure, and the more you invest it in people, the more it grows
Yeah.
for you. Like it's just rigged that way. We talk about it all the time. God's rigged it that way. If you're willing to spend the treasures that God has given you on other people, you'll get. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. And I
Basketball.
think that's the point of the offerings. Like you start serving,
Yeah.
you're sacrificing for God and for others. You're never gonna lack for more.
Yeah, and I
And that's
think
abundant life.
the thing I was going to say was I remember we had gone over a lot of this information, and um, I wouldn't shut up about it. I kept saying it. I kept saying truths out of it and pointing back to it. And I remember you coming up to me and go, "Wait a minute, maybe I'm not hearing something. Maybe I need to go back and hear. I'm missing something because you're all excited about this, and I'm not, and I don't understand why."
Yeah, yeah. I'm getting the information, but what I do with this information is disconnected somewhere. It wasn't clicking.
Yeah,
And then I think finally it was like I started relating it to the process of disciple making and how this
Yeah.
spiritually ties.
yeah,
It's like,
Practical.
oh, that yeah. And then the truth started like unveiling
yeah.
themselves,
It did.
and that's when it started getting pretty exciting. I will say, um, I don't know if you ever do this with I don't the book. There's a book that you came across years ago. It's a really hard read, but it really helps with this
Oh, the
process.
law
I
of the
just want to
offerings.
mention it. Yeah, the Law of the Offerings. I mean, it was written like 1900, so it's super old,
Yeah,
and the difficult in some places.
yeah.
But the way he walks through these and gets the framework is very helpful.
It's helpful.
So if you're listening to
Yeah,
this and you want to kind of know where these
yeah,
patterns are, like that does a good job of. Now it's hard to read,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. It
it's Andrew
doesn't.
Jukes, I think is his
Yeah,
name.
Andrew Jukes. But he lived around the turn of the century, 1900s. And I thought he was a contemporary. The way I read it, I was going to contact the guy, and I was like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, he's dead. Um,
yeah, he's been dead a long time.
yeah,
Yeah, I thought I had it on my desk here, but it must be
yeah,
downstairs.
yeah. I got it someplace. But it doesn't do everything that we're talking about, but it does give, like you say, it does give you a good
Yeah,
framework.
it's a
Yeah.
good intro for sure. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we will pick back up on the burnt offering at some point, and unless something else, something shiny and flittery comes in front of our faces, and we want to
Earl.
talk about that. But I appreciate it. See you.
Yep. Bless you
Yeah.
guys.
So Bill got to work.